Hi, welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Today, I've got exciting news. The quilt top to our Purple Pursuit is finished. I was able to take the corners of this project, and what I did was I mitered the corners. I did this a little different way from another method I've shown before. Before I showed you how to mark it and sew it on your machine to do the miter. With this one, I just carefully folded one of the sides into a 45-degree angle and pinned that so that you had a nice crisp fold that started at the point of this piece and went to the end of the fabric. And then I laid that on top of the other one and applique stitched right along that line. So it was really fast to do. And then I just whipped these pieces onto the border piece to put them in place. Now, I will tell you this. On this quilt top, the little border pieces, they look a little wavy, and I think that's because there were so many ins and outs that we were appliquing around and trying to keep that border fabric as straight as possible was a bit of a challenge. So you might find that as well. But I think that once we quilt it, and my intention is to quilt in this border a little more than I would normally quilt in a border. So I think that that will work itself out. So now what I've done is I want to demonstrate to you how I sandwich a quilt. And I just was digging in my fabric closet and I found a piece of warm and white batting that was a little bit bigger than what the quilt top that we have. And so I was able to use a scrap that I already had, which is great in keeping with this project and what we're trying to do. So I have laid the quilt top out on top of the batting. I trimmed the batting about 1 inch to 2 inches bigger than the quilt top. And in some places it's even bigger because since it was a scrap piece, I didn't try to cut it as small as possible because I'm just using one section of what was left, and this is a good use for that. So I've laid the quilt top down on top and I've spread it out and I've pressed it down, stretching it out just ever so slightly with my hands. So all around this quilt top has batting. And then I'm going to do the same a little bit on the edge of the back here. And then I'm going to fold it so I can grab a hold of both pieces together. Oh, let me tell you one other thing before I forget. In other videos, I have told you that we wanted to square up the corners of the borders. So, and to do that, you would use a square ruler, and you would just ensure that where those two borders came together in the corner, it was pretty square, and mine was. If you find yours is not, you're going to do two things. You're going to lay it so that this side and this side of the ruler line up with the fabric, or pretty closely there too. We're going to have a binding on this, and we're going to be covering up the actual edges of the fabric, so it doesn't have to be just perfect, but you want to make sure it's close. And then usually on these rulers they have this diagonal line, and you just want to do a little spot check to make sure that your mitered border, if you chose to do a miter, also lines up. Okay, so then when I laid this on, I trimmed it up so that it was about, I'd say at least 1 inch bigger than the quilt top. And now I'm grabbing a hold of both pieces and I'm going to roll it up so that we can put it aside and put our backing on the table. Now this fabric that I'm using doesn't really have a right side and a wrong side, and if it does, I really can't tell the difference. And I forget, I think we got, what did we get? 1.5 yards maybe? Yeah, about 1.5 yards is what we got. So we need to figure out what is the best way to orient the quilt top on this backing. So 1.5 yards is going to be 46 plus 8 is 54, if my quick math is right. 54 inches by what, probably about 42. Let's see, 36, roughly 42. And then how big is our quilt top? Let's try it this way. Is about 29 by what? That's a good question. I didn't think to measure that. We don't have to be exact, so we're going to use a measuring tape here. So about 29 by 45. So that 45 is going to be bigger than the width of fabric. So we're going to have to run the quilt top long ways this way and the fabric long ways this way. So what I'm going to do, as I was doing before, is we want to keep these together. And the good thing about the batting is it's going to hold that fabric next to it pretty well. And then we're going to take this, and this is the longer way. The selvage, the 1.5 yard length is the longer way. And I'm just going to lay out this section. What do we have under here? A few little tools. Put that right there. Okay, so we've got a nice big piece here, and it's sitting on our cutting mat. And I try to do that even if I'm going to pin this quilt somewhere else. If it's a really large quilt, sometimes I'll use it on my dining room table, and that's where I'll pin. I'll still take this mat down there because I don't want the pins to go through the fabric and nick the table. I don't want it to nick it here either, so that's what we're doing. So this is the long way of the quilt, and I'm going to just turn this around. Still smooth. And we're going to start up here in this corner. And what we're going to do is we're going to position the quilt top, not necessarily the batting, so that the quilt top is at least 1 to 1.5 inches inside the selvage edge. And when I say selvage edge, I want you to take into account that on the selvage edge of fabric, you have the little area where the threads are loose, kind of like a little fringe. And then you have an area where it's super tightly woven together. It's very stiff, it doesn't give. And then there are usually 2 rows of holes, and those are some type of needle mark when they're making this fabric. So we want to be 1.5 to 2 inches inside those needle holes. And the reason for that is a lot of times when you start quilting, the quilt top will give or contract. And you want to make sure that when you get done, you've got enough fabric on the outside of that quilt top so that you don't run short. So we are pretty much there. If I fold this batting back, that could use a little more. And sometimes this batting will stick to the fabric, and it is a little bit of a challenge to keep it apart. Okay, so here, this is much better. I folded the batting back on the edge of the quilt top, and see, I have that much of the purple extending, and that is a good 1 inch from the needle holes in the selvage. So we can roll this out now. And the thing we want to check now is, did we lay the batting and the quilt top on here perpendicular, so that the top also has at least an inch, inch and a half, and it's relatively the same all the way across. This one could adjust just a little bit. And again, you'll see I'm just smoothing that down. A little bit of press down and a little bit of press out with your hands to get it all evenly spread out. Okay, let's move these for just a moment. And we'll bring this a little further. My mat is sliding off the board there. Okay, so we're getting to the other side. Now, on this side and this side, we've got way more than we need. You see, we've got all the way coming over the edge. So it's really just this side we're the most concerned about. And I'm going to flip it back again and check it one more time, because it's easier to check it one more time than to cut it too short. And ask me how I know. I have a quilt that I showed as our show and tell on one of our episodes, where I had to put a little piece on the back of the quilt because I cut it just a little bit too short. So we're going to do this one more time. And then I'm going to put a few pins in. And I like to use, there's a couple of different kinds. There's regular safety pins that you're probably familiar with. They have the little head that catches the needle, and they have a little circle at the back. And usually the two pieces are straight. They also have that kind where the two pieces have a little bit of a curve here and here. And then there are quilting safety pins that have no circle on the edge. There's good and bad points about that. If you use this pin and you put it in, that won't be a good place to show you. We'll do it right here. We're putting this in and we're going through all 3 layers. And I'm going to clip it. Now, there's nothing in the back side of that pin to hold it, so it can stand up on you. I don't know if you can see that or not. So you just need to be aware of that can move around a little bit. Sometimes that's a good idea and sometimes it's not. So I'm going to use one of those, and I'm going to use just a curved safety pin. Hold it there in the middle. And then I am going to trim the edges. And you could use a rotary cutter for this, or you could use a pair of scissors. I'm going to put this out, I think I'm going to do 2.5 inches from the edge, get my ruler straight, from the edge of the quilt top to the purple. Now again, because we're going to trim this off here again when we finish quilting before we put the binding on, it doesn't have to be perfectly straight like a lot of things we do in quilting does, because this is a rough cut. but you do want it to be 2.5 would be right there. 1, 2.5. It's a little tricky because I keep thinking that I need to be 2.5 from the edge of the batting, and that's not the case. 2.5 from the edge of the quilt top, which should put us right about there. And then when we do this side, we're just going to go through batting and backing. Since we move it, we're going to smooth it again just to be sure. And we want to get the edge of this right 1.5. Whoops, I need to come this way a little bit. And we're going through the batting and the backing. And we are just about done. Now this is the long side. I would not recommend that you allow this piece to fall down because you're going to have a hard time. This is okay, but this piece not. This is sticking to each other, so it's going to hold in place. This one will want to pull the fabric out and get it out of plumb, so to speak. 1, 2.5. This is one of those situations where the blue tape on your marker at the right spot probably would have helped. There we go, and that's it. So now we have sandwiched our quilt. The only thing we need to do is we need to pin it, and we have smoothed it on this side. What we're also going to do is we're going to turn it over and smooth it on this side, because what happens is there are creases in this from being on the bolt, and sometimes they will fold over more than you think. And then what I like to do, where did my pins go to? There they are. Is I like to put a few on the back, so as we are moving forward with this, we're going to flip it over again and we're going to pin it on the other side. But when we put these few in the solid side, the backing, that keeps it from shifting when we turn it over. I wish they'd figure out a way so that these didn't catch each other every time. And just a few more. I've got them all mixed in here. Okay, so now we've pinned an area in the middle of the quilt on the back. And we're going to flip it over. And we're going to smooth it one more time, because now we know that that piece on the back is in the place it should be. And this, by pinning it, it should keep that piece on the bottom from moving. And now we just pin it. And you pin it as much or as little as you are comfortable with. I would recommend, if you are new to hand quilting, that you pin probably every 8 inches. If you're working this in a hoop, what will happen is you will put it in the hoop. You may need to take some pins out in the middle of the hoop or at the circumference of the hoop so you can get it in well, but that will hold the rest of it in place. And we'll talk about a little bit more about hand quilting when we get to those videos, but generally I start in the middle and I work my way out so that that piece in the middle is stretched just a little bit, and when you're quilting you're keeping everything taut, and then as you move out, if it needs to be adjusted you can. Hopefully it won't need to be adjusted very much, but at least that way it'll be even on all sides because you start in the middle and you work out. So that's what we're going to do. Make sure that you pin along the edges and you pin in the corners especially. The edges do tend to get a little stretched when you are hand quilting, so you just want to make sure that you pin so that you don't get wonky on the sides. And that is sandwiching a quilt. We are going to be moving this video series into the hand quilting phase. We will have updates, maybe not, it might be 2 weeks before we do it. And I'll show you the beginning stitches of how I put it in the hoop and how I quilt it. It may not be next week, but it might be the following week. EPP videos will always be on Wednesdays. So just check, and if you see a video on Wednesday, we will be working on this project. And I'll show you a couple of videos on hand quilting with some demonstration about how I do that. I quilt a little bit differently than some folks, a little untraditional, but I'll show you my technique and then you can choose what's best for you. But we will be moving into the quilting for phase next, and everyone's going to be quilting at their own pace. So there will be some updates off and on about the project until we get to the point where it is quilted and we move on to binding. As I stated earlier, I don't intend to quilt this very densely, so I think it will go pretty quickly and I'll be able to bring you those updates pretty soon. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for playing along at home with this EPP Purple Pursuit quilt. And I'm looking forward to starting a new project here on the channel with applique. So if you're interested in applique, be sure to join us. In the meantime, hit that subscribe button so you can see all of our videos in the future, including how we're going to quilt this and our applique project that we're starting. And we hope to see you soon. Enjoy your day. Bye.